SANDHAN, All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.
Good morning, friends. Here we are with the topic of I.R. Richards in the English literature and English literary criticism. Now let us first understand why to read something about I.R. Richards. A thinker, critic and a scientific writer who had been a psychologist, philosopher as well as a literary critic. As an author, he has coined so many new ways to interpret the reading as well as the writing of literature. He has combined the science along with the literature and gave a new criticism, a new dimension. In short, one can say that in the 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century, I.R. Richards has changed the way to look towards the literary text, or what we can say the literature in general. As we can see on the slide, that who was the I.R. Richards? As you can see that Ivor Armstrong Richards, born on 26th of February 1893 in England, died on 7th of September 1979 at Cambridge. Occupationally, he was known as the critic, poet and a teacher in Cambridge especially. Alma mater, Magdalen College, Cambridge, and among his significant works, that is his contribution, you can say, The Meaning of the Meaning, 1923, Principle of Literary Criticism, 1924, and Practical Criticism, 1929. He has a long span of life. You can see on the slide that between his birth and death, he had approximately more than 80 years to contribute to the literature. He has written so many works, those which have changed the way to look towards the literature. As you can see, The Meaning of a Meaning, 1923. It talks about how you can infer the meaning out of meaning itself. Means he was a kind of scientific evaluator of the words of literature. In a sense, he played the significant role in changing the way to evaluate, analyze, and have a reading of literature in general. Let us move one step further, that as a critic, what is his contribution? He has been instrumental to influence both sides of Atlantic. You can say he has influence upon the Europe as well as on America with his valuable contribution in the field of literature. His contribution in literature brought him the well famous name, whether he was in Europe or in America. Means both the sides of Atlantic were obliged by his contribution in the literary criticism. He is among those who pioneered the new criticism. His name has been considered as one of the foundational thinker in the term of new criticism. New criticism, in a sense, one can say, takes its initiative with the works of I.R. Richards. Richards denounced the old criticism where critics were supposed to follow a set of rules and regulations. Means he breaks the conventional design of a critic and produces a kind of new, a significant, strong way to evaluate the text as a form of criticism. Criticism for him is not a mere application of set of rules and intuition. He broke the codes, as we have discussed already, and at the same time he was not convenient with already established tools and rules and regulations. He has influenced various fields of knowledge such as philosophy, psychology, aesthetics, the fine arts and the broad principles of different sciences. He had command upon the evaluation and analysis of the world, and through that he could go through various fields, whether it was philosophy, psychology, aesthetics, fine arts, or you can say different sciences as well. According to some critics, he can be compared only with the Coleridge. Means his height as a critic can be compared with only Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Nobody else can be compared in comparison of I.R. Richards. Means in a sense in 19th century, if one remembers the Coleridge, so in the 20th century, it must be the name of our I.A. Richards. In a sense, he broke, he coined, he pioneered the new ways to evaluate the text. He experimented new techniques to bring out the meaning out of the textbook. Means, as we could see, he is one of the pioneer work, the first significant work, named itself Meaning of the Meaning. Means he was very much keen to know what is the meaning itself. As in the contemporary era, Jacques Derrida begins his essay, Science, Structure and Play in the Human Sciences. He says that he quotes the quotation from the Montaigne. He says, we need to interpret the interpretation than the things. Here, I.A. Richard also talks about the meaning of the meaning in 1923. Now let us move one step further, that why he has been called one of the pioneer thinker in the 20th century, especially in the new criticism and the evaluation of the text from the new critics' point of view. He had been contemporary of William Emerson and T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot, most of you must have studied some of his works of art, whether it is Westland or the Murder in the Cathedral or James Prufrock's love song of the J. Alfred Prufrock. All these texts inevitably are prescribed in our syllabus. But here, another person is there, I.A. Richards, who also had a significant contribution in making the firmament of literature in the very beginning of 20th century. Now let us move towards one more step further, that what is his significant contribution. As you can see, the first, as we have already discussed, the meaning of the meaning, 1923, principle of literary criticism, 1924. It has been celebrated work of art to introduce significant tenets of literary criticism. We shall discuss in detail in the time to come. Third work, the practical criticism, 1929. The practical criticism is based on his practical adventures in the field of teaching, and on the basis of that adventures, he contributes the work of art or the literary criticism that is called practical criticism. Another, as we had talked about, he also had contribution to the science, and that's fourth work talks about the science and poetry in 1926. Coleridge on imagination, 1934. Mencius of mind, 1932. Philosophy of rhetoric, as we had discussed, he had also contribution in the field of philosophy, 1936, and speculative instrument, 1955. In a sense, on the basis of his contribution, one can understand that he had contributed not only one field but multiple fields. In a sense, he was a kind of man of versatile category or versatile abilities. He contributed not only to the literary criticism but science, philosophy, as well as to the psychology. Now let us move one step further. The principles and technique according to the I.A. Richards. I.A. Richards believed in the principles and the technique, especially as an intellect. For him, the close textual or verbal study for analysis of the work of art is necessary, a significant one. Now, the understanding to know what is close textual or verbal study means only the words of written work of art and spoken words are significant in comparison of other historical or biographical detail. He emphasizes on the pragmatic and empirical approaches, means there should be a pragmatic approach instead of emotional or what we can say the biographical approach to the text. Instead, he talks about that we need to go to the words itself. He contributed phenomenally to the history of literary criticism regarding verbal and textual analysis, interpretation and evaluation. By giving the significance to the word itself on the textbook, on the page. One can say that he removed all the unnecessary requirement of literary analysis. The aura of Richards made literary criticism factual, scientific, and complete in multiple ways. He became a scientist in the field of literary criticism, you can say. He emphasized not only on the words but how the words play its role. That means one can say that he can be called the predecessor of structuralists as well as what we can say the formalist thinkers of the 20th century. Another point that he talks about while preparing his book Practical Criticism, he says, I have set three aims before me in constructing this book. He talks about the three aspects in this book. First of all, I quote, to introduce a new kind of documentation to those who are interested in the contemporary state culture, whether as critics, as philosophers, as teachers, as psychologists, or merely as a curious persons, I unquote. In a sense, he gives us the documentation style, a kind of pattern for all those who are interested in philosophy, psychology, literary criticism, or even in the science. Means he gives a kind of new method to look upon the textbook of study. Second, he gives, I quote, to provide a new technique for those who wish to discover for themselves what they think and feel about poetry and why should like or dislike it. Means a technique, a specific scientific technique to like or dislike the poetry. Means one needs to have a kind of reason, a significant reason why one likes the poem, because here also we are going to analyze two of the poems by I. Richards. Here in that case, I. Richards says that one needs to have a kind of technique to discuss why one likes or dislikes the poetry. Third point, I quote, to prepare a way for educational method more efficient than those who use now in developing discrimination and the power to understand what we hear and read. A kind of educational method, a new way to study the poem or the work of art. Now generally, even till the day, we can see that certain teachers teach only the biographical or the historical aspects of the work of art, and less about, they give the significance to the work on the paper itself. Here, I. Richard says that forget about the unnecessary elements of the historical or biographical aspects. Just focus upon the work of arts, and that will lead you to the perfect understanding of the work of art. In a sense, in his teaching experience in Cambridge in 1920s, he introduces a kind of pattern to the student which later on become known in 1929 as the practical criticism. One can say he should grasp, according to him, what is his aspiration for the critic. He says he should grasp a strong control over the words and effect they produce. Means critic must have a perfect control upon the words and their effects. In the case of critic, he must be understanding what word is and what it can do. He should be learned person and be able to distinguish experiences from one another. He should be able understanding person that what is good and what is bad. He should be experienced for both the aspects, whether good or the bad, and what the good word can do and what the bad word can do. He must be able to extinguish between both the words of art, distinguish the good and the bad. Third aspect he mentions, he must be sound judge of value and have adequate knowledge of psychology. Now he must be able to know about the values of the society or the work of art. Now here we will pause for a while that what he wants to say about here that psychologically a mind should be a calm in the case of critics. He should not be haphazardly talking about the unnecessary things about the work of art. He must be having the pinpoint agenda to talk about what the poet or what the work of art is talking about. He must be balanced in his mind. He must be calm. He must be a kind of neutral person who evaluates the work of art. Similarly, he should focus upon the implicit meaning through the window of explicit wordings. Now, here one can say the aspect of reading between the lines begins in the 20th century. He indicates that with the help of explicit words, a poet should be ready or able enough to undergo the implicit meaning what the poet or the writer wants to convey. Means a critic especially need to have a psychological aspect acumen to understand what is the implicit meaning of words on the line. Say for example, if we go back to the past, to the poems, in the childhood you must have heard about Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, how I wonder what you are. Means explicit meaning is the rhyming, but if we go as a child to implicit meaning, the deeper meaning of that we are dazzled by the greatness of the nature. Rhyming or the school time rhyming also brings a kind of implicit meaning within themselves. Then think about the poem like Tiger Tiger Burning Bright in the Forest of the Night. Means it brings altogether a different world within itself if one tries to go through the explicit wordings and